Hello, I'm Maddie, and this is Grief Liberation Conversations in Community. Welcome. Today, my guest is Laura. Hello, Laura.
Maddie, good. Glad to be here.
Great. What are your pronouns?
She, her, please.
Of course, and mine are they, them. So, first, I'd like to begin with a physiological sigh, a collective breath, since we're talking about grief, just to start off with a little bit of grounding, and I hope my listeners will participate as well. So, as a refresher for those who need it, it is a deep inhale and then a quick sip of air after, hold for 4, and then blow out for 6 to 8 counts. So here we go. Okay. How do you feel?
Good. Good. Thank you.
Good. So, why don't you give me a little bit about yourself?
So my name is Lara. I've enjoyed living here in Vermont for a long time. Enjoy having deep conversations with folks and exploring topics in a meaningful way, going sort of beyond the small talk and asking hard questions and learning from others more about myself in conversation.
Love that. And I really resonate with that too. So,
Mm.
thank you so much for sharing.
Mhm.
So, the first question that I have for you is what is your definition of liberation?
Yeah. So for me, it has a lot to do with freedom from oppression, either self-inflicted oppression or oppression or some sort of constraints put on us by ourselves or by others. I've experienced it self-inflicted mainly by buying into societal rules around women presenting people, making it, telling them they can't take up too much space, they can't want too much, they can't be who they truly are. They serve only to serve others. And liberation is freedom from that oppression. And so, like, I felt liberation, especially when I left public facing careers and could thus escape what I think of as the morality policing that tends to come along with public facing careers. There's a lot of, especially for women, when you're serving the public in any visual way, there is a lot of constraint around what you can do and how you can show up. And so when I left those types of careers, I felt a great sense of liberation. I felt like I could really be more of who I was, fluff out my feathers, and explore sides of myself that would have potentially threatened my careers previously, or at least made the public think that I wasn't good at my career or suitable for my career. So, for instance, I'm a burlesque dancer, and that was a big thing I wanted to do for a long time and felt like I couldn't do when I was in a public facing career.
How does this liberation that you talk about feel in your body? Like, do you feel liberated throughout your body in certain regions? Like, what does that feel like?
It affects my brain and my
Mm.
emotions and how my more emotions course through me. So it and it probably affects how I move too, quite frankly. So like I also felt this when I was in college, I'd grown up being a classically trained ballerina, and a lot of what I was taught was holding myself tight and really controlling my movements. And when I got into college, I had a ballet instructor who was like, "No, no, no. You'll actually fly if you release, if you let go of those constraints." And she taught me how to actually really fly across the floor by releasing myself, by feeling that liberation in my body.
That's neat.
Mhm.
That's really cool. Yeah. My next question is, what's your definition of community?
For me, community is summed up in like mutual support and investment for mutual benefit.
Mm.
So being present for one another and allowing others to occupy space and be who they truly are. Again, returning to that fluffing out your feathers. Like I feel
Mhm.
most in community when I feel like I can fluff out a bit more and take up more space and have the people I'm with rejoice in that with me. Both of us being able, or all of us being able to do that. When we create intentional spaces for that to happen, I feel like real community is created.
Yeah, I feel like community is one of those things that's defined so differently by everyone. And it's one of those things, if we kind of communicated that more clearly, like maybe we would feel more embraced by people. Like, I think I've shared with you personally in the past that for me, community is more like there's a mutual aid kind of community, and then there's friendship, but those things are separate. Like being in community with people doesn't mean that you're friends with them necessarily. Being in community is just showing up even when it's inconvenient, and like showing up and being seen, and like you're saying, like taking up space, but also allowing other people to take up space. And I think community is a really beautiful piece of the human experience, and especially queer community. For me, like queer community just represents authenticity and being able to really fall into who I am and hopefully getting some of my needs met.
Absolutely. And I feel like there's a clear distinction between gathering and community building.
Hmm.
A group of people coming together can create a gathering, but
Hmm.
in order for it to go into the realm of community building, there has to be a bit of effort and intentionality behind it.
Totally.
Like
Totally.
the Priya Parker's book, The Art of Gathering, talks a lot about how you can transform a bunch of people coming together into a meaningful event that can work towards community if you pay attention to the how of what's happening as opposed to
Mm.
just the what of people gathering. And that intentionality around the how can really go a long way towards helping people feel like they belong in a community that has been created in that time and space.
Hmm. I appreciate all of that. And I'd like to kind of shift the conversation to grief and body grief specifically. I'm curious, number one, when you feel grief, do you feel all grief in like one part of the body, different grief in different parts of the body? How does grief show up for you?
So I can most clearly feel grief when I'm by myself. I can pay attention and be present for myself in my body. And when I am there, I feel it in a couple different places. The most obvious place for me is in my chest because when strong emotions hit me like grief, I tend to stop breathing. And because I stop breathing, I my chest starts constricting and gets tighter and tighter and tighter. But I also feel it very much in my brain. And it's it's constriction, it's a heaviness, it's depending on the type of grief, it can also feel panicky because grief can be accompanied by a sense of feeling trapped. And the emotion itself can make me feel trapped and oppressed in my own body, right? And oppressed by my own emotions. You know, they can feel very much like something that is restricting my ability to function.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really relatable to me. Yeah. I find sometimes when I've experienced grief, like it reminds me of there's this Irish tradition called keening. And so like when somebody dies, it's just like this like grief like yell almost, like it's just this release that happens, and I feel like that's something that I've needed to do. So when I experience grief, it feels trapped in my chest as well as my throat, and I find that really fascinating. That like release can look different ways for different people, but keening, like finding that tradition just was very enlightening to me and helps me kind of move backwards into, wait, this is also a place that I feel grief, depending on what grief it is that I'm feeling.
Yep.
Do you have grief that's associated with your body itself, like whether it's aging or like your body changing as you age, or like coming into just changes that you didn't anticipate?
Yeah, absolutely. I think because so much of my life has been spent dancing, as I've aged and my body has changed, and I am not fitting in clothes that I used to dance in, or not being able to do moves I used to do before, or attending classes where people both older and younger than me are able to do moves that I'm just like, Nope." And so all of that causes a sense of grief, a sense of shame, a sense of
Mm.
self-judgment, going back to that self-oppression, all of it, comes
Mhm.
in, and it's very much a conversation I have to have with myself when that happens around, what am I learning? What is the grief teaching me right now?
Mm.
And how can I embrace those lessons and let the grief go and focus on what the lessons are teaching me, and also on the wisdom that's coming with those lessons and with the passage of time. So I'm not so focused on what I've lost, but focused more on a celebration of what I'm gaining as I continue to have time on the earth.
Is there a specific instance that comes to mind that you're willing to share with your body grief?
Well, so because I grew up in the classical ballet world, weight has always been something I've struggled with, having a accurate brain image of my weight and a healthy relationship to my body shape. And in my 30s, I ended up changing my diet a lot and losing a lot of weight to get to a weight that I really enjoyed, that made ultimately made my joints feel better, but made clothes feel better. And I just somehow, it really, I bought into the fact that I looked a lot better because I had a lot less weight on me. And then as I've aged and my metabolism has changed and I've hit the, perimenopause and going through menopause, all of the weight that I had lost previously has come back, and all of these clothes I liked no longer fit, including a lot of dancing clothes that I bought. And I did have to mourn. I mean, I didn't have to, but I went through a period of mourning and self-recrimination and just feeling like that I had lost what I had spent so much time and energy gaining, and felt like I took a big hit to my ego. I took a hit to my sense of self, and I had to process what that meant to me, what my body image meant to me, and consciously work on changing the paradigm around loss of function, loss of shape, to a celebration again of that wisdom and appreciation for the fact that I can still do a lot of what I used to do. And that's where diving into the world of burlesque has really helped as well, because, you know, at my age, going up on stage and doing burlesque, dancing in front of hundreds of strangers, and hearing that response and feeling that empowerment and looking in the mirror and saying yes to this body shape that I now have, and knowing that it can be still appreciated and enjoyed not only by me, but by other people. And that enjoyment is building a sense of community around celebration of bodies. And that helps my brain process through the grief and let go of clinging to the self-image of youth that I felt like I'd lost, and grieving over that loss. It helps me release that and be like, it's change. It's not loss, it's change.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's really powerful. Yeah, I think that throughout life, we have a lot of transitions. There's so many transitions that we are moving through, and a lot of them that we're unconscious about. And ultimately, like, childhood, there's a lot of transitions there. Adulthood, there's a lot of transitions, and even death is a transition that we have to navigate. And I think if people were more honest about their experience and how difficult these transitions can be, how difficult it is to kind of show up in the bodies that we have with what society says we're supposed to look like, how we're supposed to respond, and all of that. If we were just more honest, I feel like we would be in a much more compassionate world. But that can't exist at the same time where we're at right now.
Right. And the more that we can work through our own grief and challenge with those transitions and accept them and embrace them, the more compassion I believe we can have for others. And it helps us widen our own perspective of other people. If we continue to buy into only one type of body is acceptable, it not only does damage to us and how we see ourselves, but it feeds into us damaging other people. And it just creates divisions. It creates unnecessary friction in the world, and blinds us, frankly, from the beauty of bodies of all types.
I was just talking to my partner mm, earlier this week about how we are basically nervous systems that are responding to other nervous systems. And if we could just see that and see that, like, our nervous systems are responding to things in the past sometimes, and sometimes they can be present. But if we just saw people as nervous systems, that would actually look very creepy. But but if we could, like, think about people from that context, I think that would give us a lot more compassion for other people, and, like, realize that other people are showing up the best ways that they can. And it doesn't matter how a person looks, how a person identifies, how much a person weighs, what race or ethnicity a person is, like what religion, like none of that matters when we are just human having a human experience, and we all have a nervous system that is responding to things in real time.
Yeah. And if we can be self-aware of that and look inward when we have reactions, negative reactions about other people's bodies, and be curious about, why am I having that reaction? What is that reaction teaching me about myself?
Hmm.
Because it's not about them, it's about ourselves. And
Right.
the more we can do that, the more we can learn. And in that learning, hopefully grow not only more acceptance for the people around us, but more acceptance for ourselves.
Hmm. Well, I mean, that's what the world is. The world is a mirror. up to ourselves. Everything that we see is a mirror up to ourselves. And people are so afraid in Western society of looking into that mirror
Mhm.
because that's where the fear and unknown is. And if you have everything defined and there's so many rules and contexts that you feel comfortable with, then there's no magic. There's nothing but control there. And I can't, in my experience, the more control I sought out, the unhappier I was. Releasing that control and showing up for people, being present in the world, and acknowledging all the things that are happening as they come up for me instead of like pushing it down the way I did when I was younger. Embracing that and knowing that, oh, this is either something I need to learn and grow from, or just getting curious with, oh, that was an interesting response that my body just had to this situation, whatever it is. And we've lost curiosity.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And I think having that curiosity requires us to admit that we don't know everything
Mhm.
and requires us to be vulnerable in a way. And to bring it back to grief, I think grief is similar. It requires us to be vulnerable. It requires us to be open to not that we're not our own little islands separate from everything else that are totally self-sufficient, that something has happened that's caused this grief reaction, which means our connection to something has been affected. And I
Mhm.
think if we don't acknowledge that our connection to something has been affected and self reflect on that, we don't allow ourselves to grieve. We don't allow ourselves to grow. I think curiosity can be part of grief as well. They can be intermingled, and I don't know if people see it that way generally, but I certainly do. I think the emotional responses I have to things, I have a reflex around these emotions, including grief, around, wow, what am I learning? What is this teaching me? And I think that's why I tend to grieve in isolation, even though that sounds contradictory, but because I want to pull in, I want to focus in and look and see what's happening, which is hard for me to do around other people because when I'm around other people, I'm so wired to be outwardly facing and being there for other people that it's hard for me to hold my own grief solidly when I'm with other people.
So a couple things come up for me. Number one, yeah, grief, in my experience, causes us to slow down. And in that slowing down, that's where real connection can come from and that real curiosity can come from. And I'm not sure if that's what you were meaning when you were saying getting curious while experiencing grief, but that's how I kind of received that.
Mhm.
And then the other thing is like there's a lot of connection between grief and community, which I think is really interesting because I haven't found research that shows grief in like neurodivergent population necessarily. And having a brain that is wired to kind of not shut down, but just kind of disconnect a bit in order to go into this like self-preserving mode because of like sensory overload or whatever it is. I feel like there's something there is worth exploring. I know that I tend to grieve alone, and when I'm ready, I'm reaching out for that community. When I'm ready for community,
Mhm.
but community has helped me heal just by being present when I've needed the community there. And and just having somebody checking in saying, "Okay, how are you taking up space today? How are you taking care of yourself today? I know you just went through this really difficult thing, or I know you're in a lot of pain today, or I know that something is about to happen and you're preemptively feeling this way, having people that are quote unquote safe is different than having just like being out in community and pretending like things aren't happening. Like,
Yeah.
I could go to a drag show and that would give me very temporary relief. I
Mhm.
can get out of it for a little bit, and that's needed. I mean, we do need to give ourselves breaks, but grief needs to be felt and it needs to be witnessed. And sometimes that means we are witnessing it ourselves, and sometimes that means it needs to be witnessed by someone else when we are feeling safe and ready.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I if I try to connect with other people in my grief, it's usually, like you said, when I'm good and ready, when I've done the processing already, I'm feeling stable enough that I feel like I can be vulnerable enough with another person and feel safe with it. It's unlikely something that I would do with a larger group of people. I think when I'm in community and grief is involved, it's more me, again, being stable, being grounded, and being there to hold space for other people in their grieving process to allow them to feel my support and presence in a way that might be helpful to them. And but I don't necessarily get that comfort from other people doing the same for me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Mhm.
Has there been a time that you have reached out to community and either felt held or needed to separate yourself?
When my grandmother died and we had a funeral for her, there was such an upswell of community support because she was so beloved. And at her funeral, I felt overwhelmed by the grief of other people and their love that it distracted me from my own grief. So I was more feeling empathy for other people's grief and being there with them and their grief than I was grieving myself. And so I feel like when you're talking about sensory overload, I totally can relate to that because being around other people and their emotions, I have to tend to myself and really be grounded in order to be fully present. Otherwise, I just sort of shut off or I'm totally overwhelmed by other people. So, so yeah, that tends to happen for me. There are what I think of as softer grief examples, like if I'm feeling in the past when I felt sort of grief around my changing body, going to like burlesque class and feeling the support and the celebration of other people is, I think, an example of me sort of in that community of that class to a certain extent dealing with my body grief about the changing body. But that's been, I think of that as kind of a different level of grief than grieving the loss of a loved one.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I feel that. And what you're saying, although this is very different, it reminds me of the grief that I've experienced with disability. Like when I initially got injured, I was grieving my body, but I was also grieving the loss of friends because I could no longer show up in spaces and do the things that I was doing, and they didn't know how to hang out with me anymore. So, like,
Mhm.
there's been a lot of community building alongside my grief journey and body journey because when people feel discomfort, they don't know what to do with that.
Mhm.
And I think when they witness someone becoming disabled, kind of like when somebody dies, especially if they're young, when people are met with someone else's mortality in that mirror, they see themselves and they're trying to disconnect from the reality that that could be them in the future.
Mhm.
And it's wild to me because disability is the only marginalized group that literally any human can join at any time in their life. And it's so hard to take up space sometimes with all of the identities that I have because I never know which identity is going to trigger someone else's bad behavior. Is it the fact that I'm trans, non binary, disabled, neurodivergent, low income? Like, there's so many thoughts and feelings that people have. And I think one of the mechanisms that I run into the most is people being so shut off from my reality. Like, even family members of mine don't believe that I'm disabled because they see disabled as a bad word. And being disabled isn't a bad thing. And in fact, they don't realize that they are also disabled
Right.
in different ways. I
Yep.
mean, granted, my parents, who are a bit older, they are still running every day. My dad's in his 70s, my mom is in her late 60s. They run every day and they are still disabled. Like, there's still things that they cannot do that they could do before. And, I'm not going to diagnose them or anything, but the neurodivergence comes from somewhere.
Yep. Yep.
So it's weird how so many people look at people who have marginalized identities, and instead of going inward, they get reactive and shut it out and pretend like it's not happening, pretend like it's not real, and just shut down completely. And so that part of my disabled journey, there's been so much grief around how everyone else is responding to what is actually happening to me. It has nothing to do with them.
Mhm. Yeah.
Again, nervous systems.
Yep. Yeah. And they're sort of grieving that loss of connection because they their own issues get in the way of that connection continuing. And grieving that change, I can imagine it must be challenging to grieve that change while also holding on to space for them should you choose to reconnect if and when they can get out of their own way and realize what it is that they're going through. And that's not your task to help them do that. But if they can, move through whatever reaction they're having with their nervous system and realize the lesson they need to learn and then re-engage with you, that shift, that transformation could be a sense of real joy potentially. But in the meantime, I can imagine there's a sense of grief for that disconnect happening for no fault of your own, just because they are in their own way.
Yeah. There's a book I've been reading called Walking Each Other Home by Ram Dass and Mirabai Bush, Conversations on Loving and Dying. It is really powerful in so many ways. They really talk about this idea of how much Western society is ruled by fear and running away from the unknown. And if we could just embrace the unknown and talk about the scary things, then there'd be less fear around it. And there's a part where Ram Dass talks about going to the Ganges River a long time ago, and he was feeling sad because he was seeing all these sick people and people who looked like they were dying, and they were like walking to the river, and he said it took him a long time to realize that they were sad for him. Those people were sad for him because he had a different concept of death and suffering than they did. They wanted to be there. That was part of the ritual of dying. It's being seen and having this ritual. And that kind of changed how he viewed death and the unknown and fear and that kind of thing. And I think that's just so powerful because what do we do with the people that Western society deems undesirable? We hide them away. We literally cover people up after they die and pretend like they're not there anymore and whisk them away into the night. And people who are disabled were literally not allowed out of the house or an institution before 1974. It was called like the ugly law, I think. And anyone who was disabled, disfigured, or had any kind of disability would be thrown in jail if they were outside. That wasn't that long ago.
Nope, sure wasn't. Hmm.
I find it so fascinating that that fear has such a grip on people, and trying to remember that when I'm remembering we're just a bunch of nervous systems can be really hard because of the amount of hate and confusion and just misunderstanding that I've received from people. And I'm just trying to survive and exist and figure out my way through this life as well. And I am just as deserving as anybody.
Yeah. Yep.
So I'm curious, is there one particular lesson that stands out that you've learned from experiencing body grief?
That well, the lesson that I've experienced for body grief personally is, well, it's elevated to my consciousness, the ego that I had tied up in what my body can do and how I look. That was, I didn't really feel like I had a lot connected to that. And as my body changed and I lost what I had, it helped me realize that. And it also helps, it reminds me of the power that I can reclaim in finding beauty in myself, no matter how I look or how my body functions. It taught me that, the body's beauty takes many forms, and I want to continue to look for that beauty and nurture it outside the norms of what society says is beautiful, so that I can hold space for me, for my own self, to fluff out my feathers like I do for other people. And in doing that, I create more capacity for myself to hold space for that community building we were talking about previously. So it's this interesting feeding in of what I want to do, the world I want to create. I have more capacity for creating that if I can continue to be more accepting of the change rather than focusing on what I'm losing and grieving the loss, but to celebrate the transformation or the transition and the change.
Mhm. Yeah, I feel that. I mean, we were talking about weight earlier,
Mhm.
and when I was younger, I was super skinny. And people commented on my skinny body all the time about how tiny I was, how easy I could be to throw, which at the time I didn't realize it's kind of gross. I was like, oh yeah, that's just me. But there was always people who would say stuff like, eat a sandwich and, eat some peanut butter. And I'm like, well, this is just the body that I have. And it doesn't matter until I gained weight. And then my brain literally could not accept what I was seeing because I had never looked like that before. And it was really hard because it wasn't like I was on any specific diet. I never dieted. And there are definitely some signs of ARFID patterns, which I still deal with a bit, but in less of a way. But it was a very limited amount of types of food that I would eat. There were a lot of sensory issues with food, and I also just wasn't always hungry the way that a lot of people were. And it wasn't about me trying to control my weight, it was that I just wasn't hungry and I hated a lot of food that was prepared for me. So when I started to grow out of that and I started gaining weight once I hit about 30, it was so hard for my brain to see me anymore. And I think that that feeds into like some of the dysphoria that I felt as a trans person too, because being skinny meant that my boobs were smaller and less pronounced, and my hips were smaller and less pronounced. And then all of a sudden, I had hips, and I couldn't see that non binary version of me that I could always see. And that made it even scarier for me. And I remember having a breakdown in a Target, like, changing stall when I was an extra small ever since I could remember, and I needed a new bathing suit, and I grabbed a small knowing that I had gained weight, and I couldn't even get it past my knees. And so I ended up needing, I think it was an extra large, and my brain just like exploded because I didn't have mirrors at home that were like full body mirrors. I had no idea how the world was perceiving my body. I just saw what I looked down and knew that I didn't feel right. And it had nothing to do necessarily with like that diet and diet culture thing, and everything to do with dysphoria, gender dysphoria. And so, like, that prepped me for once I started testosterone and then had all that fat shift and muscle gain and all of that. I always wanted to have broader shoulders and more muscle on the top, like in my arms and shoulders, and I finally have that. And that is awesome. And it's paired with being in the largest body that I've ever been in. And I'm finally happy too, letting go of what other people think I should be doing, letting go of diet culture and the fat phobia that I grew up with from like within the church I went to, within the school I went to, within my family. I didn't realize how much I hated myself until I really slowed down and processed the grief of my changing body, the transition, not just gender transition, but the transition of my body through these different stages now into a place of acceptance and love. I love my body, and it might be disabled, but it is doing the best it can. And I am grateful for that. Because if my body didn't care for me, then it would have shut down a long time ago. And so my body also loves me. even though I have, autoimmune issues and um, pain conditions and different stuff, I still love my body.
Nice. I'm getting there.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of the journey, and it's not everybody's journey, but it's certainly been part of mine.
Yep.
I think self-acceptance is one of the hardest things that we come into, especially since Western culture says you have to look like this and act like this and be like this. And when you are not like that, you are resisting. And I think that's it's beautiful in itself. Like, I don't want to be like the people who are making up these rules and saying this is what we're supposed to be like. I don't want to be like them. I don't want to hold those same values. I want to be a whole other person. I want to be me. I want to be authentic. And I want to live in my body and embody love and my values.
Yes.
What is something that is bringing you joy lately?
Well, it's been a couple months of rehearsing and performing in a couple burlesque shows. And I've been performing in a group of four fantastic women. We're all very different body types, very different movement styles, very different ages and abilities. And we have built a community among the four of us of joy and of celebrating each other and of finding life and love and laughter in building a piece together that really radiates happiness and joy because not only are we doing burlesque, but we are emphasizing in the performance, connecting to each other, reveling in each other, and reveling in the fact that we're on stage in front of an audience, interacting and enjoying their responses and building, celebrating the community that we've built among the four of us and bringing that to the wider world. And that, that the fact that I'm dancing as part of a quartet brings me a sense of joy that I don't think I would ever reach doing a solo. So yeah, doing the burlesque dance as part of a group definitely has been bringing me joy. I am exploring, and this is my year of yes this year, and so I am exploring reconnecting with people and putting intentional energy into strengthening bonds of people in my life because my sort of philosophy of being is that we build heaven on earth here together in our connections with each other. And investing in building that heaven with others brings me an immense amount of joy. So yeah, those things.
I love that so much. Can you actually explain what the year of yes is for people who may not know what that
Oh,
means?
yeah, yeah. So so part of growing older for me is reaching these milestone years, which traditionally in culture bring people in our Western culture bring people a lot of anxiety and angst and grief around reaching a milestone age. And so this is my year of reaching 50 and I decided when the pandemic came along, I had been a social butterfly ahead of time doing lots of social events, super focused outwards. And when the pandemic happened, all of that stopped. And I really pulled in and realized I had been too outwardly focused. And the pandemic was hard for many people, all of us, on many different ways. But for me, it also gave me the space to pull in and recalibrate how much energy I was setting out into the world. And so it's been several years of recalibrating, and now I've reached a point where I'm ready to re-engage with the world, but also, and that's sort of, so my year of yes is reaching out to very specific people to re-engage with them, to invite them to say yes with me to re-engaging, but also adding a layer of meaning onto it. We're going to celebrate my 50th year. We're going to celebrate our connection. And then I'm going to invite also the folks that I've invited to do this with me to offer me an idea to say yes to in what we do together. So I've said to folks, hey, you know, not only do I want to get together and reconnect with you, but if you've got an idea of something we can do together in our time together that you've wanted to do and wanted some company to do it with, or you've wanted to do with me specifically, so we want to give it a try. And I will do my best to say yes to whatever people suggest.
That's really cool.
Mhm.
That's like really cool to start saying yes to things for something different. I mean, like, it's so easy to say no and not experience things, but to connect with people and say yes is just really powerful, and it's a statement. Like, not just yes, but yes in community with someone. And yeah, it's just really beautiful.
Thank you.
Where do you experience that joy? Like the joy that you're feeling when you're talking about burlesque and when you're talking about your year of yes, where is that joy that you're feeling?
Mm, that's such a great question. It it is interesting as I ponder that question. My instinctual answer is in the present, in my
Mm.
full being in the present. Because so much of my life I spend in my head, thinking about things, processing things, and in a way that's fairly disconnected from my body. And when I feel joy most profoundly, it is when I have entered a flow state where I am fully present. And it's not that I'm not thinking, it's just a different wavelength of brain operation. And so when I'm performing, I've rehearsed it so much that I'm not thinking about the moves. They're just happening. And I am present, feeling them happen, responding, being open to the energy that's happening, and just radiating happiness at being here now.
Mm. I love that. Yeah. Like anxiety makes us like get in our heads and we're in the future, we're not present, and then like grief causes us to slow down, and sometimes that means like replaying a lot of the past. I mean, same with depression, that can slow us down in a different way, but joy being a present feeling is that's really awesome. Like I love that. Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you.
And the idea of that word present and all of its meanings, right? That
Yeah.
as a gift as well, right? So all of that is neat.
Yeah, thank you. So I just have one last question for you.
Mhm.
What would you like our listeners to take away from our conversation today?
I love that question so much. The big thing for me is the importance of holding space for yourself. To listen to your emotions and your reactions and hold them with care. To give them the space they need to teach you about yourself. Your emotions are vital, important messengers, and being open to the lessons that they are there to teach us is an important part of our life journey. And so we need to make the space to hold space for ourselves and for our emotions, and that will help us continue on our life journey of growth and becoming who we are meant to be.
Beautiful. Thank you. I really appreciate your time and your energy to be here today. And listeners, I thank you for being here as well. So that's it for now. Stay tuned for the next episode. Remember to be kind to yourself, and we'll see you next time.